As we begin today, I want to acknowledge that I am located in Lloydminster on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. Before the arrival of the explorers and settlers, many First Nations traveled through and thrived in this area, which also includes the homeland of the Métis. I was born here, but I chose to return here as an adult. And now, after unlearning what I was taught in public school in the 1970s and 1980s, and relearning a less whitewashed history of this place, I see this land and its stories through very different eyes. I acknowledge that the roots of my family on the prairies came at the cost of the First Nations people who were here long before. Their land was taken so that my ancestors could farm and build their lives in this place that became known as Canada. I cannot change the past, but I can try to move forward in a good way by sharing what I've learned about the Indigenous peoples whose teachings are so intricately tied to this land and all it encompasses. The title for the next 2 episodes is drawn from performances Mr. Fine gave years ago when he was traveling and sharing stories and songs. Every so often in our conversations, he would mention this title, Ancient Indian Secrets and Other Matters of Consequence, and we would laugh. After all, it's a catchy phrase, but it also seems to capture what I was actually learning, because every time I pick up the phone or sit across from Wes, he shares great secrets and matters of consequence. This includes references to Mother Earth, her creatures, and her medicines, and personal stories, some I had never heard before. He looks back to historical stories of badger call and the Cree syllabics, and an ancient story of the berry-picking woman. But he also looks forward, asking what the young people need to hear. Please join us by listening with an open heart and an open mind. Mr. Fine is sharing stories as he knows and has experienced them, which may differ from those told within other Indigenous communities and settler institutions. Throughout the series, we discuss various plants and traditional healing methods. This is not intended to replace medical advice from trained healthcare providers. Some episodes contain graphic descriptions of events witnessed and experienced by the guest at his time in residential school and at various points throughout his life. They may spark memories and questions, so we are asked to listen with open hearts and minds. Viewer discretion is advised. I think it's been interesting to watch this calling badger call story and the syllabics unfold as an outsider, because when I first met you and, well, who is this guy? Let me Google him. and a written version of that story, you were mentioned in it. And then there were some radio interviews with parts of the story, and so I've heard those. And then I think more recently there was a news article where, that story is referred to, and it just keeps unfolding. And I guess for the last 10 years, listening to your stories, they have all continued to unfold, and they come in pieces, and they're expanded upon, and they move and they evolve. They're still alive. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Âsokan and his brother became adults. And Âsokan used to use a badger hide as his pipe bag and tobacco bag. He would hang it off the side, and it was the hide of a badger. And when he required the help of the badger, he would call upon his pipe bag and say, "Aho, Mr. Nusk." "All right, badger, you were gifted by the Creator with the ability to dig us out of this mess, And the badger would do that. But then the other reference I have for that name is Mr. Nuskoil, who was an Indian man from around the Churchill River area in northern Saskatchewan. And that man died, and he was dead for 4 days. And then he came back to life on the 5th day. But before he had died, he had, it's a long story, but he had been on his way to a meeting of the Metewak Medicine Society with his singers. His singers knew his power songs, and when he was threatened or being involved in some spiritual exercise or battle that he was having difficulty with, he would signal his singers, and they would sing his spirit calling songs, and his spirit helpers would come to his aid and help him deal with whatever it was that he was having problems with. But it was on one journey like that, on their way to a meeting, when walking through the bush, all of a sudden there was this ball of light that appeared ahead and in front of them. And it was off the ground. And they were so shocked by that to see it was like a fireball, I guess, or a light, but just hanging in the air. And they all fell down to the ground, and they hid their faces in their arms. And they said after that, even though they were hiding their faces, they could still see that light. And then they heard a voice coming out of that light, and it was addressing Badger Call. And after it went out, they were able to continue on, and they got home. And Badger Call was traumatized by that, or in a state of some kind of state. But they said that over the course, that was in the fall, and then it became winter, and over the course of winter, he became sick. And one day he told his wife, "I'm going to die. But when I'm dead, don't let them take my body and put it up in one of those scaffolds or bury me. Just leave me wrapped up here, because something is going to happen. And my body can't be taken out." And so the time did come when he passed away. And they prepared him for putting up in the scaffolds, Iskopitigan. But when they had him ready to be taken out, his wife refused to allow them to touch his body, because he had told her, "Don't allow them to take me out of the lodge here." And so that woman refused to allow those people to take her husband's body out of the lodge, and a lot of them left, because nobody sits around with a dead body for more than, the 3 days, and on the 4th night or 4th day they take it out. She wanted to keep it even after 4 days, and a lot of them thought, that they might be overstepping the boundaries and didn't want to be involved in that, so they left. But that left a core group with him. And the next morning, when they went to check up on him, the medicine people there were lifting up his arms, and they were still hadn't stiffened up. So they began to rub him on his arms and wrists and hands and chest and legs. And they were doing that, they said, when his eyes opened. And he talked about how he had been on a journey, and that he had traveled to the 4th world, he called it, the 4th dimension. And there he had been taken to Creator. stood in front of Creator's seat. And Creator spoke and told him that it was not his time yet, but he had been brought there for a special reason, and showed him that system of writing, syllabics. But along with that, told him about the future of the Cree. And some people say it was the history of the Cree, that when he came back, he had a booklet made out of birch bark that chronicled the history of the Cree from their beginning to that point in time. And some say that he had a sheet of birch bark that had all the syllabics on it. And the prophecies and predictions, he talked about those, given the same time as he had been given this system of writing. And they said that after that, he got better, became healthy again. And when it was springtime and the snow was melting, the rivers were breaking up, he was told before the rivers break up completely to head south and go find this range of hills at the bottom of which there would be a grassy plain. And there they would find a man named Âsokan, strike him on the back. And he would have a headman with him whose name was Mitewais. Would be like to say spiritual person, Mitewak. But they would know that he was coming with his party of people, and they would prepare for his arrival. And when they got to strike him on the back by the Battle River there, which is just below Sweetgrass, that he recognized that land as the place that he had been shown in his dreams, that he was to go to. And he went there and he found strike him on the back and explained his story to him. And so strike him on the back had the young men of the camp build a plains longhouse, which was kind of like an A-frame building, and it was quite long. And that was where Calling Badger and his party stayed. And in the morning and in the evening, often he would be sitting outside, smoking and talking and teaching. And one day there was a group of people listening to him, sitting outside of that Saputawan, we call them. Saputawan, the Plains Cree Longhouse. Sitting outside there listening to him, and he saw a couple of young girls coming back from having checked their snares. And they were carrying some prairie chickens. And he signaled them over. One of them came over and, Mahtana, piesis nikawapama, let me see that bird. And that young girl had handed him that bird, and he took it and held it by the neck. And its eyelids were down. And prairie chickens, they have a blue and purple color on their eyelids. And he told him, you see this? Untehnigan. In the future, this is how women are going to paint their eyes. Make like the prairie chicken here. And in the future, it will be different or difficult to distinguish between men and women, to distinguish the genders of a person, because they will all begin to dress the same. And when you begin to dress the same, we say that for ceremony and sacred events that women should wear dresses. That's the attire for ceremonial stuff. But when you no longer make that distinction and you start dressing the same, are your ceremonies lost? Does your dress no longer make any difference because you have no ceremonies? Where is the focus of your society now? And he talked about how things would be. And the letter I have written by Badger called to James Evans, who was a Methodist minister, offering to show him the syllabics because it would be a much easier way to acquire an understanding of those marks than it would be for Evans to do the preparation so that he could himself spirit travel through the 4 dimensions and stand before Creator and ask for those. He said that'd be much more difficult. Be much easier if I simply showed you, And so he showed that minister, that Evans. And Evans got together a group of northern Cree, and Ardnog's ancestors was one of them. That's one I went to see, one of the people I went to see in Winnipeg to talk about this story, which they kind of had bits and pieces of, but really didn't know. And so I told them some parts of the story that made it much more real for them. And she said that was her ancestors who had worked with Evans, taken those syllabics and used them to translate the Bible into Cree. And then I found that letter from the archives, the American Philosophical Archives, written by Badger called, to a man. He called him James Evans. And in English it would be James Evans. But we didn't have those sounds, so he did it the best he could, James Evans, and this is the work that you're doing. And it's good work, and it would be much easier if I simply transferred that information to you. Otherwise, you would have to prepare yourself to spirit travel. And I mean, that requires incredible intellectual understandings of power and spirit and soul. And it'd be much easier if I simply taught them to you, rather than you going through all this process trying to develop yourself so that you could eventually stand before Creator and ask for these things for yourself. And so that was how they were given to that minister.
Except the history books have long said that James Evans invented Cree syllabics.
Right. And James Evans, that letter was written to him in 1845. Now, you go through other Western historical materials, for instance, that book, George Nelson book. Already in 1823, he's talking about syllabics there and how they're used in the East. And that, some people were so powerful they could look at the syllabics, and they were used primarily by medicine people to document the mixtures they used and, the things they used them for. And they would include the awakening song of the medicine in those syllabics. And so a syllabically literate person could take that piece of birch bark and begin to sing the song that they used to awaken the spirit of this medicine, to cure this person of this ailment that they had. It was all in there. Yeah. Now we're restricted to the marks. We've lost that connection to the song. And I mean, we lose these things, but it's temporary, I think, because we shall always have spiritual people. We will always have people who are blessed by the spirits to be involved in this kind of learning and understanding, because humanity needs those people. And those are the visionaries. So you require the guidance of visionaries, to help the administrators in a community. Like there was warrior chiefs and there was the peacetime chiefs, and they were all guided by visionaries. The old warriors, if they had no spirit helpers, they would never be the leaders. They could become part of the warrior society, but they would never sit at the head. And it was only the people who had earned the empathy of the spirits and who had the spirits standing beside them who would make it into the upper echelons of the society.
And so this story of the Cree syllabics came to you from old Fine Day, who was told the story by Strike Him on the Back. Is that correct?
Well, actually, Alphonse Little Poplar, who was my father, he spent his life searching for this story because it was part of his line. You see, there was myself and there was Alphonse, and Alphonse was married, was Irene Fine Day's husband. And Irene, her ancestors all used syllabics and all had pieces and bits of the story. But Strike Him on the Back was the one who, was transferred that information by calling Badger. Strike Him on the Back was a Plains Cree. Strike Him on the Back had a son named Harry Achenam. I have photographs of Harry and his wife and a couple of their kids. Well, Harry had a daughter. I think she was a middle daughter. Her name was Nancy Achenam. And Nancy was Alphonse Little Poplar's mother, you see. And so we heard about this story all our lives. Never in its totality, but the bits and pieces that, would be brought home because he'd been out in Onion Lake talking to elders or over, in Stonies or, wherever the story led him, he went to try and get it back together. And I have a copy somewhere of this story, and it's called The Story of the Mystery Man, Mr. Nuskowil, and the syllabic system of writing. And it's a typed document, 129 pages long, that talks about a lot of the prophecies and predictions that were given. I put that somewhere, and I have yet to find it. And on the other hand, I have another body of stories, sacred story, Towards a New Past, which was never published. But I just saw a copy of those papers actually in Max's room the other day. I think I had 6 copies left, and people were coming and asking. And I knew that if I gave them all away, that would be it for those stories. They would get lost. And so I kept back some. I think I kept back 10 copies of it. And I noticed a copy in Max's room the other day. Towards a New Past, it's called. But, our history through our eyes. And they said that, Harry and the descendants of Strike Him on the Back, most of them knew how to use that system of writing. They wrote letters to each other, in the family, because you couldn't leave the reserve. Because if you were caught, then you would get sent to jail for 6 months, I think. So they used letters a lot, smuggling them around. From reserve to reserve. And in 1845, I have that letter written by Badger Cole. And in 1942, I have a copy of a letter written by Gabe Crow Buffalo from Daystar to my grandfather Sam Fineday in Sweetgrass in syllabics, So that was handed down and put to use. It was, people were literate in many ways, not only with syllabics, but I mean, you could read the stories of the land, tracking animals or the colors of the leaves in the trees, depending on all of these things tell you stories. And just the other day I was saying to Max, this would be a great time to go to that hill across from Spirit Drumming Hill and take a picture of the bushes in the valley, because the colors of the leaves in the bushes as they're changing, I know what trees those are. And so if the pincherry trees are bunched up over here, I know the area they're in. So if I ever need to go and get them, for medicine, and they're used primarily for birthing medicines. Midwife, I think that's what they call them. Because that's what my grandmother's job was. She was a midwife, and she delivered, between 50 and 100 babies in her lifetime in our community. And so she had to know all the medicines. And it's amazing the different kinds of medicines that there are, in a breech birth where you come out feet first. That is really dangerous for both mother and child. But there's a plant. You can take the roots, make it into a tea, give it to that woman to drink, and that baby will go back in and flip itself and come out head first. And sometimes there were women who, died during childbirth. And so what would happen? The baby would be given to someone, to look after. Well, that baby needs milk. If the person that got that baby doesn't produce milk, there's a little flower you can pick. 4 of them. Put them into a liter of water and boil them up. Give that woman that to drink, and her breasts will fill up and she'll start producing milk, you see. And then that baby will be able to grow and to survive. But lots of these medicines, people find it unbelievable that medicines can do this. They think medicines have no intelligence. And that they're, they cannot do anything, but they can do incredibly amazing things. And that's just a couple of examples, And calling badger, he told a lot about how things would become in the future. You know, how they would build, it's like a ribbon. Metal, they would stretch it across the prairies. And on those metal pieces, they would have a machine, iskuteuta a fire wagon that didn't need horses to pull it around, or any animal. It would just travel on its own across the prairies, riding on that ribbon of metal. And they would build, beside those places, they would put line, like strings, on posts. And they would be able to send messages on that metal string from one place to another place far away. And people would know what was being said. You know, these were considered amazing things when, and there's a painting that I saw. I think it was one of those southern Indian artists, and it's of an Indian man standing up against a power pole with his ear against the pole. He's trying to listen for those sounds that are those messages that are being sent, you see. But all he heard was a little humming noise. Couldn't understand what was being said. So there were these things that happened, and how they were perceived, and attempts were made to understand them. But, we arrived here without much understanding, just because we've been traveling our own separate trails. And at some point there has to be, the beginning. And it could be, well, we share camping spots. For instance, in Cree, Fort Carlton is called Pehunanik. That's another thing I've got these young indigenous students on the trail for. Find the Cree names or indigenous names of the forts these traders had, Like Norway House was Fishing Lake, where the fish are, But they had names for these places before the forts were put there, eh? And those old names survived, And so when we're reading historical material, sometimes they reference a name, but it's not on the map, but it's in the oral history, you see. Oh, they're talking about Norway House. That's what that was called, Fort Carlton was Pehunanik, Edmonton was Beaver Lodge, Amiskukamiguk, the Beaver Lodge Fort, and where the forts were and people congregated and stayed there primarily. They were called the Waskaikanewinuak, the house people. Another distinction, you see. Yeah. When it was time to settle on the land and make a house, a lot of people stayed around the forts. Yeah. Because that was where, you could get supplies and bring your goods. So it's not surprising that these towns sprang up there. Yeah.
But the indigenous people would have been on the outskirts.
Absolutely, yeah. And even in Edmonton, Edmonton was built right on a reserve. People were just moved aside. It's like another place that happened was in Carleton. Young Chippewan's band. Young Chippewan band got dissolved in 1896 by the government. 1896, and that Tutus, who was Finday's wife, she used to live in Young Chippewan's band. And then she moved to Sweetgrass to live with Finday. And when she was living in the Young Chippewan band community, her husband there was a man named Kaskitewawaskisu, Black Elk. And with that man she had a little boy, and she called him Mostosawasis, Buffalo Child. When she came to Sweetgrass, she had Buffalo Child as a little boy already. And Finday raised Buffalo Child, and Finday had children with Tutus too. One of them was Kip Squat, blocking the door. His government name was Sidney Finday. And Mostosawasis was given the name John Finday. But old Finday had, I believe it was 8 or 9 children. I think 3 of them died when they were young. All these stories come down through the family. And, since that time, and even before that time, we were told that 9 generations before Finday, well, before our generation, 9 generations before that, we had a treaty with the Blackfeet. And one of the, when they had treaties with other tribes, the leaders of those tribes, they would exchange children. If we're going to be partners, well, here, I'll give you my kids to raise and you give me your kids to raise, so that when they become adults, they are well versed in your culture. You have to make sure they are very knowledgeable people. Take them to the best teachers in your community, so that when they come back home to me, I will have an understanding of who you really are. And I will do that with your children. And when they go back to you, you will know and understand me and my people far deeper than simply, meeting in passing. Because we will have produced some very knowledgeable people, taught at the highest levels by the greatest teachers. And that Blackfoot's name in Cree is translated to high fire. And if I handed you my children, I would also ask one of my esteemed members of my community with a partner, go with them. Look after those children. Help that person educate my children, you see. Learn their language, learn their ceremonies, learn their songs, learn everything that you can about them.
So if that's how treaties were meant to unfold between the Cree and Blackfoot, when they signed treaty with the white man, the expectation, there would have been some similar expectation that we are entrusting you and you will entrust us.
Well, one of the statements I will never forget in discussing these new treaties with white people, this old Indian said, they took our children, but they didn't send us theirs. Something unfulfilled here, something not right about that. They're holding back something, you know. And I always remembered that. They came and took our children, but they didn't send us theirs to educate, to teach. And always, you know, something was left undone that should have been corrected. And you know, for me, when the spirits came and said, we've put you here to teach and to heal. And there are spirit trails that come from all over the earth that lead to your lodge. People will come here for healing and for teaching. And if they come in a sacred manner, welcome them in. Give them what they need. Help them however you can. You know, provide them with what they are worthy of. And understand that they have arrived at your doorway because we guided them there. See? And would you refuse us? And so, come on in, you know. Let me tell you a story. Let me take you places. Let me share a meal. Let me tell you about my dreams and my visions. And let me listen to yours. Let's bring this treaty to life. Yeah.
For years, we've talked about making connections and having these conversations. And, you know, how do we make a difference? Well, it's one story, one connection at a time. But thinking about this as a treaty agreement is a very powerful way of...
Yeah, and it's about repatriation and reconciliation. I mean, let's both understand what treaties are, you know. It's more than just you pulling out a paper saying you now own my land, you know. There's far more to it than that. You want to make an agreement with me, well, learn who I am, you know. Learn about my past. Learn about my current contemporary lifestyle, and learn about my dreams and aspirations and visions, because I'm headed in a certain direction. And you're welcome to come.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you to Mr. Fine for his time and stories. Special thanks to the Lloydminster Public School Division Prairie Thunder Boys Drum Group for providing the music for our podcast. We also want to acknowledge Lakeland College for the use of space and equipment, as well as TELUS Storyhive for their support.